The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky, its rays beating down upon the parched earth of Cedar Ridge like the hammer of an angry god. The year was 1873, and the small frontier town sat precariously on the edge of civilization, where law was as thin as the muddy trickle that passed for a river during the drought months. Dust devils danced between the weathered buildings, carrying with them the scent of horse sweat, tobacco smoke, and human desperation. Sarah McKenna stood at the cracked window of her family's ramshackle cabin, watching the heat shimmer rise from the dirt road that led into town. At 19, she possessed the kind of beauty that seemed almost defiant in such harsh surroundings. Auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, green eyes that held depths of intelligence and stubborn pride, and a spine that remained straight despite the weight of poverty pressing down upon her shoulders. The cabin, if one could dignify it with such a name, consisted of 2 rooms held together by determination and dried mud. The walls bore the scars of her father's drunken rages, fist-sized holes poorly patched, broken furniture mended with twine and hope. Her mother's presence lingered only in small touches, faded curtains sewn from flour sacks, a cracked china plate displayed on a rough shelf, and a worn Bible that Sarah still read by candlelight when sleep eluded her. Thomas McKenna had not always been the broken man who now sprawled across the single bed, reeking of cheap whiskey and failure. Sarah remembered glimpses of a different father from her childhood, a man who had brought his family west with dreams of gold and prosperity. But the gold had proven elusive, the land unforgiving, and when consumption took her mother 3 winters past, something in Thomas McKenna had simply given up fighting. "Get up," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of too many similar mornings. She shook her father's shoulder, trying not to breathe in the sour smell that clung to him like a second skin. "The sun's been up for hours," Thomas groaned, one bloodshot eye cracking open. "Leave me be, girl. My head's splitting something fierce." "Your head's always splitting," Sarah replied, turning away to hide the mixture of pity and disgust that crossed her features. "There's no food left, and Harlan came by yesterday. Said if you don't pay what you owe by week's end, there'll be consequences." At the mention of Jake Harlan's name, Thomas struggled to sit up, fear momentarily cutting through his stupor. Harlan ran the largest saloon in Cedar Ridge and had a reputation for collecting debts by whatever means necessary. The scar running from his left eye to his jaw served as a warning to those who might consider crossing him. I'll figure something out," Thomas mumbled, but his words carried no conviction. They both knew he had nothing left to sell, no credit to draw upon, and no prospects for honest work that his whiskey-soaked hands could manage. Sarah busied herself with the few chores that remained, sweeping dust that would only return, mending a tear in her only decent dress, trying to stretch the last handful of cornmeal into something resembling a meal. She had taken in washing when she could, but even that meager income had dried up as the town's more respectable women made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the drunkard's daughter. As the day wore on and the heat became unbearable, Thomas McKenna sat at their rickety table, staring at his trembling hands. Sarah had seen that look before, the look of a man wrestling with his conscience and losing. When he finally spoke, his words fell like stones into still water. "Sarah, girl, there might be a way." She turned from the wash basin, drying her hands on her apron. "What way?" Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. "Harlan. He made an offer, said there's men in town, lonely men with money, said a pretty girl like you could—" The words died in his throat as Sarah's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "No," she said, the single word sharp as a blade. "Not that," Thomas said quickly, though his haste rang false. There's another way, a contract, like domestic service. He called it binding, but honest work." Sarah studied her father's face, reading the lies written in every line. She had heard whispers of such contracts. Young women sold to pay debts, their fates left to the mercy or cruelty of whoever held their papers. Some called it employment. Sarah knew it by its true name. "You're talking about selling me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Thomas flinched but pressed on, desperation making him cruel. "It ain't selling, it's giving you a chance at a better life. Some rich man's house, proper meals, maybe even pretty dresses, and no freedom," Sarah finished. "No choice in where I go or what I do. That's slavery by another name, and you know it." "You got no idea what Harlan will do if I don't pay?" Thomas exploded, his fist slamming onto the table. "You think your high and mighty principles will protect you when his men come calling? You think they'll care about your pride when they're burning this place down around our ears?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah knew her father was right about one thing. Jake Harlan was not a man who made idle threats. She had seen what happened to those who crossed him, had heard the screams that sometimes echoed from behind his saloon late at night. 3 days passed in tense silence. Thomas drank what little whiskey remained, while Sarah went about her duties with mechanical precision. On the morning of the 4th day, she woke to find her father gone and Jake Harlan sitting at their table, examining a piece of paper with satisfaction. "Your father signed the contract," Harlan said, his scarred face splitting into what might charitably be called a smile. "You're to be auctioned this afternoon. Fetch a good price, you will, and your daddy's debts will be cleared." Sarah stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the betrayal. "I won't go." Harlan's smile widened. "Oh, you'll go, one way or another. Your father was very specific in the terms. You can walk to that auction block with your dignity intact, or my boys can drag you there. Makes no difference to me, though I imagine the bidders might prefer their merchandise undamaged." The public square of Cedar Ridge had never seen such a crowd. Word had spread quickly. An auction was to be held, and not just any auction. The platform typically used for livestock sales had been hastily cleaned, and men gathered like vultures around carrion. Cowboys rubbed shoulders with merchants. Miners stood beside land speculators, and all of them wore the same hungry expression. Sarah stood on the platform, her chin raised despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She had chosen to wear her mother's church dress, faded blue calico that had seen better days but still held a ghost of respectability. Her hair was pinned severely back, and her green eyes blazed with defiance as she surveyed the crowd. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Wallace, who usually dealt in cattle and horses, cleared his throat nervously. Even he seemed uncomfortable with the nature of this particular sale. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "we have here Miss Sarah McKenna, age 19, sound of body and—" He paused, catching Sarah's glare. "And strong of spirit. The contract is for 5 years of domestic service, all legal and proper." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd at the word domestic, but it died quickly under Sarah's steady gaze. She stood perfectly still, her posture regal despite the circumstances, and something in her bearing made the men shift uncomfortably. "Shall we start the bidding at $50? Wallace asked. Silence greeted his words. The men who had seemed so eager moments before now hesitated, whispering among themselves. Sarah McKenna's reputation preceded her, a girl who spoke her mind, who had once slapped Carl Morrison for making improper advances, who could quote scripture and Shakespeare with equal facility. This was no meek lamb to be led quietly to slaughter. $40? Wallace tried again, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening coolness beginning to creep in. Still nothing. The crowd began to murmur more loudly. Some men shook their heads and walked away, deciding that however pretty the girl might be, the trouble wasn't worth it. Others simply enjoyed the spectacle, caring nothing for the outcome but savoring the drama. $30. Gentlemen, surely a bargain for 5 years of service. Sarah allowed herself a small, bitter smile. Even in her humiliation, she had won a victory of sorts. These men who saw women as property to be bought and sold were afraid of her, afraid of the fire in her eyes and the steel in her spine. At the auction, no one claimed the defiant young woman, and she preferred it that way. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed to mock the sordid scene below. Wallace looked desperately toward Jake Harlan, who stood at the edge of the crowd with a face like thunder. The contract had been signed, the debt remained, and someone would pay, one way or another. Just as Wallace opened his mouth to speak again, a murmur ran through the crowd. Starting at the back and rippling forward like a wave, men stepped aside, some reaching instinctively for their guns, others simply staring in shock. The gathering parted like the Red Sea, and through the gap strode a figure that seemed to have materialized from the very dust of the desert itself. The dying light of day cast him in silhouette, but there was no mistaking what he was, an Apache warrior in a world that had no place for him, standing at the edge of a town that would just as soon see him dead as speak to him. The auction ground fell silent, save for the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The sky above Cedar Ridge had transformed into a canvas of fire and blood. The setting sun painted the dusty streets in shades of crimson and gold, while shadows stretched long and dark between the weathered buildings. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and something wilder, the untamed essence of the desert that civilization had failed to conquer. The Apache warrior stood at the edge of the crowd, as still as the ancient rocks that dotted the landscape. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with the kind of presence that made the space around him seem both larger and smaller at once. His hair, black as a moonless night, was held back by a simple leather band. He wore traditional dress, a cotton shirt and leather leggings, with moccasins that had made no sound as he approached. A knife hung at his belt, its handle worn smooth by use, and across his back was slung a rifle that had seen better days but was clearly well maintained. But it was his face that held the crowd transfixed. Angular features carved by wind and sun, skin the color of burnished copper, and eyes as dark and deep as desert wells. Those eyes held no emotion as they surveyed the scene, not the anger one might expect, nor fear, nor even curiosity. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by human cruelty. "Get out of here, Redskin!" someone shouted from the safety of the crowd. The voice belonged to Pete Morrison, Carl's younger brother, who had inherited all of his siblings' meanness with none of his courage. "This ain't no place for your kind." The Apache's gaze shifted slightly, focusing on the source of the voice with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Pete Morrison stepped back involuntarily, suddenly finding the ground at his feet fascinating. More voices joined in, emboldened by whiskey and numbers. "Filthy savage! Someone get the sheriff! We run your kind off once. We'll do it again." Sarah watched from the platform, temporarily forgotten in the commotion. She had seen Apache warriors before, but always at a distance, always in groups, and always moving away from the encroaching settlements. This man was alone, and instead of avoiding the town, he had walked directly into its heart. Despite her own dire circumstances, she found herself curious about what could have driven him to take such a risk. Jake Harlan pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "You're a long way from the reservation. Apache," he said, his scarred face twisted in a sneer. "Best turn around and head back before something unfortunate happens." The warrior's response was to reach into a pouch at his belt. The crowd tensed, hands moving to weapons. But what emerged was not a weapon, but a leather purse. He hefted it once, and the unmistakable clink of gold coins rang across the square. "I come to trade," he said, his English careful but clear, each word pronounced with precision. His voice was deep, carrying despite its quiet tone. "This woman, what is her price?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest, though whether from fear or something else, she couldn't say. Wallace, the auctioneer, found his voice first, though it came out as more of a squeak. The bidding was to start at $30, but no one—" "I will pay 100, the Apache said, cutting him off. He tossed the purse to Wallace, who caught it reflexively. "Gold, true weight." The auctioneer's hands shook as he opened the purse and examined its contents. His eyes widened. It's real," he whispered. Then louder, "The gold is real." The crowd erupted. You can't sell her to a savage. It's ungodly. What kind of town are we running here? But Jake Harlan's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Gold is gold, he said coldly. And a debt is a debt. The contract says nothing about who can bid. Have you lost your mind? Harlan, Dr. Edmund Whitmore, one of the town's more respectable citizens, stepped forward. You'd send a white woman off with this heathen. I'd send her to the devil himself if he paid in gold. Harlan replied, Besides, she ain't going nowhere she didn't agree to. Her father signed the papers, all legal and proper. The Apache here is just another bidder. It's not Christian, someone else shouted. Neither is selling women to pay gambling debts, the Apache observed quietly. Yet here you all stand. The truth of his words struck like a physical blow. Several men had the grace to look ashamed, while others grew more angry at being called out by someone they considered beneath them. Sarah found her voice at last. Do I have a say in this? All eyes turned to her. She stood straight-backed on the platform, her chin raised despite the trembling in her hands. The dying light caught her auburn hair, turning it to flame. You have no say, girl, Harlan said harshly. Your father's signature gave up that right. Then it matters little who holds my papers. Sarah replied, her green eyes blazing. A prison is a prison, whether the walls are made of wood or stone or desert sand. The Apache studied her for a long moment, and something flickered in those dark eyes. Perhaps respect, perhaps simple acknowledgement of a kindred spirit who refused to bow. 100 gold coins, Wallace announced, his voice stronger now that profit was involved. Going once, going twice. This is madness. Pete Morrison had found his courage again, or perhaps his stupidity. I won't stand by and watch. The Apache moved. One moment he was standing still, the next his hand had dropped to his knife. He didn't draw it, didn't even grip the handle, but the mere suggestion of movement was enough to silence Pete mid-sentence. Sold! Wallace cried quickly, banging his gavel on the podium with desperate finality. To the gentleman for $100 in gold. The word gentleman applied to an Apache warrior caused another ripple of angry muttering. But the deal was done. Wallace hurried to complete the paperwork, his hands still shaking as he transferred ownership of the contract. Sarah descended from the platform on unsteady legs. The crowd parted before her, some with pity in their eyes, others with disgust, most with a kind of horrified fascination. She held her head high, refusing to show the fear that gnawed at her insides. The Apache waited at the foot of the steps, patient as stone. Up close, she could see the details she had missed before, a thin scar along his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and harder fighting. The way his eyes constantly scanned the crowd for threats, even as he appeared relaxed. You will come, he said. It wasn't a question. It seems I have little choice, Sarah replied, proud that her voice remained steady. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. There is always choice, but some choices lead to darker paths than others. Behind them, Jake Harlan was already counting his gold, satisfied that the debt was paid and caring nothing for what came next. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to watch the strange pair depart. Some of the women crossed themselves, whispering prayers for Sarah's soul. The men muttered darker things, speaking of what they would do if they caught the Apache alone. The warrior seemed unconcerned by the hostility surrounding them. He turned and began walking toward the edge of town, not looking back to see if Sarah followed. After a moment's hesitation, she did. What else could she do? The contract was legal, the sale complete. To refuse would only bring more trouble, and she had no allies here. No one who would stand against Jake Harlan and his men. As they passed the last buildings of Cedar Ridge, Sarah turned for one final look. The town squatted in the gathering darkness like a diseased animal, smoke rising from chimneys and the saloon's windows glowing with lamplight. Somewhere in that maze of wood and sin, her father was probably already spending his 30 pieces of silver on whiskey, telling himself he had done what was necessary. You will need these, the Apache said, startling her from her thoughts. He held out a pair of moccasins, clearly made for a woman's feet. "The journey is long, and those shoes will not survive it." Sarah looked down at her worn leather boots, already falling apart at the seams. She accepted the moccasins with a quiet "thank you," surprised by the practicality of the gesture. As she changed footwear, he spoke again. "My name is Samuel Crowfeather. You will call me Samuel." The Christian name surprised her, though she supposed she shouldn't have been shocked. Many Apache had been forced to take English names at the missionary schools. "Sarah McKenna," she replied automatically, then felt foolish. He already knew who she was. "We travel by night," Samuel said. "Safer, less chance of meeting those who would object to our arrangement." Our arrangement? Such a civilized term for such an uncivilized situation. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. This morning she had been a poor but free woman. Now she was property, bought and paid for, heading into the desert with a man her people considered a savage. They walked in silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began their nightly dance. The desert, which seemed so barren during the day, came alive with nocturnal sounds, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through the canyon rocks. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her new owner, trying to reconcile the violent savage of frontier legend with the man who walked beside her. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. And his silence seemed less threatening than simply natural, as if words were a currency to be spent sparingly, as they put distance between themselves and Cedar Ridge. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. The town had been a prison long before today's auction, its narrow minds and cruel judgments as confining as any chains. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. Or so she told herself, as the darkness swallowed them whole and the uncertain future stretched out before them like an uncharted map. The desert night wrapped around them like a living thing, vast and breathing with its own ancient rhythm. They had been walking for hours, following paths that Sarah couldn't see but that Samuel navigated with the certainty of one reading a familiar book. The moccasins he had given her proved their worth, allowing her to move almost silently across the rocky terrain, though she lacked his grace in avoiding the thornier plants that seemed to reach out from the darkness. The moon hung low and pale, casting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound carrying across the empty miles and raising goosebumps on Sarah's arms. She pulled her shawl tighter, though the chill she felt had little to do with the temperature. They stopped near a dry creek bed where a few stubborn cottonwoods clung to life. Samuel moved with practiced efficiency, gathering kindling and starting a small fire that gave off little smoke. He worked in silence, and Sarah found herself watching his hands, strong, capable, marked with old scars that told stories she couldn't read. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing to a smooth rock near the fire. "Rest. We have far to go when the sun rises." Sarah sank down gratefully, her feet aching despite the comfortable moccasins. She watched as he unslung a water skin from his shoulder and offered it to her first. The water was warm but clean, and she drank carefully, mindful not to take too much. "How far?" she asked, handing back the water skin. 2 days, maybe 3. He settled across from her, the fire between them casting dancing shadows on his angular features. "Depends on weather, depends on who might follow." The implication sent a chill through her. "Will they? Follow. I mean." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he was weighing his words. Some men cannot bear to see their world challenged. They will talk, they will rage, they will drink. Most will do nothing more. But some, he shrugged, a gesture that said more than words could. They lapsed into silence. Sarah found herself studying him openly now, trying to understand this man who had paid a fortune in gold to purchase a stranger. His age was difficult to determine. He could have been anywhere from 25 to 40, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of hard living rather than years. There was a stillness about him that was almost unsettling, as if he had learned to be part of the landscape itself. "Why?" she asked suddenly, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "Why did you buy me? You don't know me. I'm not—" She gestured helplessly. "I'm not what anyone would consider valuable." Samuel fed a small stick to the fire, taking his time before answering. "Value is not always what others see," he said finally. "In your eyes, I saw fire. On that platform, surrounded by those who would use you, you stood like a warrior. This has worth." "You paid $100 in gold to save a woman with fire in her eyes?" Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I paid to balance a debt," he corrected quietly. "Not yours, my own." Sarah waited, but he offered nothing more. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. In the distance, she could hear the yip of coyotes, closer now, but still not threatening. "What's your name?" she asked, then caught herself. "Your real name, I mean, not the one they gave you at the mission." His eyes flickered to hers. Surprised, most whites didn't acknowledge that the Christian names forced upon his people were not their true identities. "Samuel is enough," he said after a moment. "The other belongs to a different life." Sarah understood about lives left behind, names that no longer fit. She had been someone else once, too, a cherished daughter, a girl with prospects and dreams. Now she was property, bought and sold like livestock. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her that her owner probably understood freedom better than any of the townspeople who had watched her auction. "Are you taking me to your village?" she asked, needing to know something. Anything about what lay ahead. "My people are camped in the hidden places. Yes, but you are not prisoner, despite what paper says." He pulled something from his pack, the contract Wallace had given him. Without ceremony, he fed it to the fire, watching as the flames consumed the document that had made her property. Paper burns, chains break, freedom is taken, not given. Sarah stared at the burning contract, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Then why should I come with you? Because behind us is certain cage, ahead is uncertain path. Which do you choose?" She thought of Cedar Ridge, of her father's betrayal, of Jake Harlan's cold eyes and the men who had looked at her like a piece of meat. Then she looked at this strange man who had spent a fortune to buy her freedom and then burned the evidence of ownership. "I choose the uncertain path," she said quietly. Samuel nodded as if he had expected no other answer. He reached into his pack again and pulled out dried meat and flatbread, sharing the simple meal without ceremony. They ate in companionable silence, the desert night alive around them with its secret sounds. "Tell me about your people," Sarah said eventually. "I know only what the town gossips say, and I suspect little of it is true." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "What do they say?" "That you're savage killers who steal children and do terrible things to white women." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "That you worship dark spirits and eat, well, things that shouldn't be eaten." "Ah." The sound might have been amusement or sorrow. "Yes, we are very terrible. We plant corn and hunt deer. We sing to our children and care for our elders. We thank the earth for its gifts and try to live in balance. Savage indeed." "You're mocking me." "I mock the stories, not you." His expression grew more serious. "My people have fought to keep our land. Yes, we have killed to protect our families, as any would. But the stories your people tell," he shook his head. "Fear makes monsters where there are only men." Sarah digested this, thinking of all the tales she had heard, all the warnings about the brutal Apache. Yet here she sat, sharing a meal with one who spoke more gently than most of the civilized men she had known. "What will your people think of me?" she asked. "A white woman brought to camp?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Some will welcome you. Others will watch and wait. Trust is earned, not given, but none will harm you. This I promise. And what am I to do there? What is my purpose?" "Purpose?" He seemed to consider the word. "You will learn our ways if you choose. Help with daily work. Heal, perhaps. We have need of those who know plant medicine, or teach some wish to learn English letters, or simply be, until you decide your own path. You speak as if I'm free to leave whenever I wish. Are you not? He gestured to the empty desert around them. No chains hold you, no walls surround you. If you wish to return to your town, the path lies there. He pointed east, towards Cedar Ridge. I will not stop you. Sarah looked in the direction he pointed, then back at him. We both know I can't return, not after being sold to an Apache. They'd never accept me back. Then perhaps you begin to understand, Samuel said quietly, what it means to be cast out by those who claim to be righteous. The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She was an exile now, as surely as if she had been formally banished. The proper ladies of Cedar Ridge would cross the street to avoid her if she returned. The men would assume the worst, would believe she had been ruined, regardless of the truth. Her father. She pushed that thought away. Thomas McKenna was dead to her now. I need to know, she said, lifting her chin with some of her old defiance. What do you expect from me? You say I'm not a prisoner, but you bought me. Men don't spend gold without expecting something in return. Samuel's dark eyes held her steadily. I expect nothing. Hope, perhaps, that you will find healing in the desert as I once did, that you will teach us as we teach you, that connections between peoples might grow from understanding rather than fear. He paused. But expect? No. Expectation is another kind of chain. They talked on as the fire burned low. Sarah asking questions and Samuel answering with patience, if not always fullness. She learned that his people moved with the seasons, following ancient patterns, that they were struggling to maintain their way of life as settlers pressed ever closer, that the reservation boundaries meant little when survival was at stake. When her eyes began to grow heavy, Samuel banked the fire and pulled blankets from his pack. He handed her one made of soft rabbit fur, taking the rougher wool one for himself. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. Sarah wrapped herself in the blanket, surprised by its warmth and softness. She lay on the hard ground, staring up at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The desert that had seemed so threatening now felt almost protective, its vastness a buffer between her and the ugliness she had left behind. Samuel? She called softly. Yes? Thank you for giving me a choice. There was a long pause before he replied. Freedom is not given. Sarah McKenna, but sometimes, perhaps, it can be shown. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was of flames consuming paper and of chains that existed only in the mind. Tomorrow would bring uncertainty, possibly danger, definitely the unknown. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, it would also bring possibility. The desert wind sang its ancient song, and under its vast canopy of stars, two unlikely souls rested on their journey toward something neither fully understood, but both desperately needed. A place where broken people might find wholeness, where understanding might bridge the chasm between worlds, and where freedom was more than just a word. The second day of their journey brought challenges that Sarah had never imagined. They rose before dawn, the desert still cold and painted in shades of purple and gray. Samuel had them moving while the stars still held court in the sky, taking advantage of the cool hours before the sun transformed the landscape into a furnace. They crossed a vast expanse of red sand, the kind that seemed to swallow sound and stretch endlessly in all directions. Sarah's legs ached, and despite the moccasin's comfort, blisters were forming on her feet. She said nothing, unwilling to show weakness, but Samuel noticed her slight limp by mid-morning. Stop, he commanded, leading her to the shade of a towering red rock formation. The stone rose like ancient fingers pointing at the sky, worn smooth by centuries of wind. Let me see. I'm fine, Sarah protested, but he was already kneeling, gently removing her moccasin. His touch was impersonal, clinical, as he examined the angry red marks on her heel and toes. City feet, he said without judgment. They will toughen. From his pack, he produced a small pot of salve that smelled of sage and something earthier. This will help, as he tended her feet with surprising gentleness. Sarah studied the landscape around them. It was alien, hostile, beautiful in its starkness. She could see why her people feared it. There was no mercy here, no forgiveness for the unprepared or foolish. Yet Samuel moved through it as easily as she might walk the streets of Cedar Ridge. "How do you find your way?" she asked. "It all looks the same to me." Samuel pointed to the rock formation above them. "See the marks? Wind patterns, different on each side. And there," he indicated a distant mesa. "The shape tells direction. The plants speak too. Sage grows where water sometimes runs. Juniper roots point to hidden springs." He finished with her feet and sat back. "The land is a book. You must learn to read." They rested through the worst heat of the day, Samuel showing her how to create shade using her blanket and the rocks. He shared more of his dried meat and a kind of hard cake made from ground mesquite beans that was sweet and filling. Water was rationed carefully, each sip a precious thing. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they encountered their first real danger. Sarah noticed Samuel's sudden stillness, the way his hand moved casually to his rifle. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders, 3, maybe 4, following our trail." Her heart hammered. From town. Perhaps just travelers. But the desert teaches caution. He scanned the horizon with eyes trained by years of survival. "Come, we leave the easy path." What followed was a grueling climb through a narrow canyon, the walls pressing close and the ground treacherous with loose stones. Sarah's dress caught on thorns and rough rock, tearing in several places. Her hands were scraped raw from climbing, but she pressed on, driven by the urgency in Samuel's movements. They emerged onto a high plateau just as the sun touched the western mountains. Samuel found a defensive position among the rocks where they could watch their back trail while remaining hidden. They waited in tense silence as shadows pooled in the valleys below. Then she saw them, 4 riders moving slowly along the path they had abandoned. Even from this distance, she recognized the lead rider's yellow shirt, Pete Morrison, with 3 of his cronies, all armed and following their tracks like hunting dogs. "They'll lose us in the canyon," Samuel said quietly. "Too dark soon to follow our path, but they will try again tomorrow. They're from Cedar Ridge, Pete Morrison. He's the one who called you." Sarah trailed off, unwilling to repeat the slur. "I remember. Loud voice, small courage." Samuel watched the riders mill about in confusion at the canyon mouth. "They seek glory, perhaps, or gold, or simply cannot bear that you left with me." As darkness fell, the riders made camp at the canyon's entrance. Samuel and Sarah withdrew deeper into the rocks, moving carefully in the growing gloom. They dared not light a fire, instead sharing cold food and water in the shelter of an overhang. "Will they give up?" Sarah asked. "Some men cling to hate like driftwood in flood, but the desert tests all resolve." He was quiet for a moment. "They are not prepared. See how they build their fire, too large, too bright. It blinds them to the dark. How they sit, too close together, easy targets. Town men playing at being hunters." Despite the danger, Sarah felt oddly safe. Samuel's competence was reassuring, his calm assessment of the threat matter-of-fact rather than boastful. She had seen enough men puff up their courage with loud words and whiskey. His quiet confidence was something entirely different. They dozed fitfully through the night, taking turns watching. During her watch, Sarah studied the star patterns Samuel had begun teaching her: the hunter, the bear, the star that does not walk. The desert night was alive with small sounds, but she was learning to distinguish the normal from the threatening. Near dawn, Samuel touched her shoulder. "They move," he whispered. Below, the riders were breaking camp, arguing among themselves. Their voices carried in the still air, though the words were indistinct. Finally, 3 of them mounted and began riding back east, but Pete Morrison remained, gesturing angrily before eventually following his companions. "Cowards!" Sarah breathed. "They came all this way just to turn back?" The desert asked a price they were unwilling to pay. No shame in recognizing one's limits, only in not knowing them. Samuel gathered their few belongings. But one may return. Pride is a powerful poison. They descended from the plateau by a different route, Samuel leading her through paths that seemed impossible until you were on them. By the time the sun was fully up, they had put miles between themselves and any pursuit. The landscape changed as they traveled. Red sand giving way to gray stone, scattered juniper becoming denser pinyon forest. They climbed steadily, and Sarah found herself breathing harder in the thin air. But the beauty of it caught her unexpectedly, vistas that stretched forever, clouds casting moving shadows across the earth, flowers blooming impossibly bright against the harsh stone. "Your world," she said during one rest. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Emptiness, death, nothing but struggle and survival." Samuel's rare smile appeared. "There is struggle. Yes, but see?" He pointed to where a hawk circled lazily on thermals. "She hunts not from desperation, but from purpose. The rabbit she seeks feeds on plants that grow despite drought. The plants sink roots deep to hidden water, all connected, all surviving not in spite of the land, but with it." They encountered a small spring in late afternoon, barely more than a seep from the rocks, but pure and cold. Samuel showed her how to fill the water skins without disturbing the sediment, how to read the animal tracks in the mud to know if predators frequented the spot. As she knelt by the water, Sarah caught her reflection and almost didn't recognize herself. Her neat hair had come loose, hanging in wind-tangled waves. Her face was sun-touched, her dress torn and dirty. But her eyes held something new. Not defeat, not resignation, but a kind of awakening. "You're changing," Samuel observed, and she realized he had been watching her. Is that good or bad? It simply is. The desert strips away what is unnecessary. What remains is truth. That evening they made camp in a grove of ancient cottonwoods, their massive trunks telling of water deep below. Samuel built a small fire, deeming them far enough from pursuit to risk it. He disappeared for a time, returning with a rabbit he had snared. Sarah watched him clean and prepare it with efficient movements. Nothing wasted. "Teach me," she said impulsively. He looked up, surprised. "To hunt? To survive? To read the land as you do? To be—" She searched for the words. "Sufficient unto myself." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "This learning changes a person." "You certain?" "I've already changed. I might as well choose the direction." He nodded slowly. "Then we begin. First lesson, observation. Tell me what you see around us." "Not just look, see." Sarah tried, describing the trees, the fire, the stars beginning to appear. Samuel listened patiently, then began pointing out what she had missed: the owl pellet that marked a roost above, the game trail barely visible in the grass, the way the trees grew thicker on one side, indicating prevailing winds, the constellation rising that told the season as clearly as any calendar. "I saw none of that," she said, frustrated but fascinated. "Eyes must learn, like hands must learn weaving or feet must learn dancing. Time and practice." He turned the rabbit on its spit. "Your people, they move through world like blind men, seeing only what they build, what they fence, what they own. My people learn young that to survive, you must see what is, not what you wish." They talked late into the night as the fire burned low. Sarah told him of her mother, her love of books, the dreams she once had of teaching school. Samuel spoke carefully of his own losses: a wife and child taken by soldiers' bullets, a way of life slowly crushed by encroaching civilization. "Is that why you paid for me?" Sarah asked softly. "Because you couldn't save them?" Samuel was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Perhaps partly, but also because in your eyes I saw my own rage at being caged. Understanding, sometimes, is its own reason." The next day would bring them to his people, to an uncertain welcome and an unknown future. But sitting by the dying fire, her feet toughening, her hands learning new skills, her eyes beginning to see, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, not hope exactly, but possibility. The desert had tested her and found her not wanting. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, not as property or victim or anyone's definition of what she should be. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, and two damaged souls found a moment of peace in their light. The hidden valley appeared like something from a dream. One moment they were threading through a narrow passage between towering red cliffs. The next, the world opened up into a bowl of green surrounded by protective stone walls. A creek ran through its heart, fed by a spring that bubbled up from deep within the earth. Cottonwoods provided shade, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind, while small gardens showed where hands had coaxed corn and squash from the soil. The Apache camp was smaller than Sarah had imagined. Perhaps 30 wickiups arranged in loose family groups, their dome shapes blending naturally with the landscape. Smoke rose from morning fires, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the air. It seemed impossible that such a place could exist, hidden and whole, while the outside world pressed ever closer with its hunger for land and conquest. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. A boy who had been watching the goats gave a sharp whistle, and within moments people emerged from their dwellings. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, ranging from curious to suspicious to openly hostile. She kept her chin up, meeting their gazes with as much dignity as she could muster in her torn dress and dust-covered state. An elderly man approached, his face a map of deep lines and old scars. He wore traditional dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and his gray hair was bound with leather and feathers. This, Sarah understood instinctively, was someone of importance. He and Samuel exchanged words in Apache, the language flowing like water over stones, musical and completely foreign to her ears. The conversation seemed to grow heated, with gestures toward Sarah and sharp words from some of the younger men who had gathered. One in particular, perhaps 25 years old with a warrior's bearing and angry eyes, spoke at length, his tone leaving no doubt about his feelings regarding her presence. Samuel responded calmly but firmly, and Sarah caught her name among the Apache words. Finally, the elder raised his hand for silence. He approached Sarah, studying her with eyes that seemed to see through flesh to the spirit beneath. "You are the woman bought from the White Town," he said in careful English. "I am Joseph Broken Arrow, leader of this band. Why do you come here?" Sarah glanced at Samuel, but his expression told her this was her question to answer. "I come because I had nowhere else to go," she said honestly. "Your warrior offered me freedom from a cage. I chose to accept." "Freedom," Broken Arrow repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yet you are white. Your people destroy ours, take our land, kill our children. Why should we welcome you?" The hostile young warrior added something in Apache that made several others nod in agreement. Sarah didn't need translation to understand the sentiment. "I cannot answer for my people's crimes," Sarah said, surprising herself with her steadiness. "I can only speak for myself. I've been cast out by those you speak of, sold like property because I would not bow to their ways. If that makes me enemy to them and you, then I am truly without a place in this world." Broken Arrow studied her a moment longer, then turned to address the gathering in Apache. The crowd began to disperse, though not without backward glances and muttered comments. The young warrior, Sarah heard him called Mateo Redhawk, lingered longest, his dark eyes promising that this discussion was far from over. "You may stay," Broken Arrow announced. "Maria Quiet Rain will teach you our ways. You will work, you will learn, you will contribute. In time, we will see who you truly are." An older woman stepped forward, her face weathered but kind. She said something to Samuel that made him nod, then gestured for Sarah to follow. As Sarah moved to comply, Samuel caught her arm gently. "You did well," he said quietly. "Truth has power, even when it is difficult. That man, Mateo Redhawk, he hates me. He hates what you represent. There is difference. In time, perhaps he will see you, not just your skin." Samuel's expression was unreadable. "Maria will care for you. Listen, learn, be patient. I will be near." Maria Quiet Rain's wickiup was neat and organized. Herbs hanging from the wooden frame, baskets and pottery arranged with careful precision. She spoke little English, but her gestures were clear enough. She provided Sarah with Apache clothing, a cotton blouse and long skirt, both well-worn but clean. She showed her where to wash at the creek, clucking disapprovingly at Sarah's blistered feet and scraped hands. The next days blurred together in a routine of hard work and harder learning. Sarah rose before dawn to help prepare morning meals, grinding corn on stone mettets until her arms ached. She learned to tend the cook fires, to identify edible plants, to weave baskets from willow branches. Her hands, soft from years of only light housework, developed calluses. Her back ached from bending over unfamiliar tasks. The children were the first to accept her presence, curious and less burdened by the weight of history. They would peek around wickiups to watch her struggle with simple tasks. When she smiled at them, some smiled back. A little girl named Rosa, perhaps 6 years old, began following her like a shadow, giggling when Sarah attempted Apache words and patiently correcting her pronunciation. The women were more reserved, but not unkind. They showed her techniques with the patience of those teaching a child, though Sarah suspected some enjoyed watching her fail at tasks they had mastered in childhood. She bore their amusement with as much grace as she could manage, understanding that pride would win her no friends here. It was while learning to scrape a deer hide that she first began to understand the complexity of Apache life. Anna Long River, one of the younger women who spoke some English, worked beside her, showing her how to use the bone scraper at just the right angle. "Your hands are too tense," Anna observed. "The hide is already dead. You cannot hurt it worse." Sarah adjusted her grip, trying to mimic Anna's smooth movements. "Everything here has purpose," she said, noting how every part of the deer was used. Meat for eating, hide for clothing, bones for tools, sinew for thread. "Waste is luxury we cannot afford," Anna replied. "White men kill buffalo for sport, leave them to rot. We cannot understand this. Life feeds life. To waste is to dishonor the sacrifice." As days passed, Sarah began to see the rhythm of camp life. The men hunted and scouted, always watchful for dangers. The women maintained the camp, but their work was far from simple. They were doctors, craftswomen, teachers, the keepers of traditions and knowledge. The elderly were revered. Their counsel sought on all matters. Children were treasured, allowed freedom to explore, but taught responsibility early. She saw Samuel often, but rarely spoke with him. He seemed to be giving her space to find her own place, though she sometimes caught him watching from a distance. When their eyes met, he would nod slightly, a gesture she found oddly reassuring. Not everyone was warming to her presence. Mateo Redhawk made his displeasure known through cold stares and harsh words in Apache when she passed. Others followed his lead, creating a faction that viewed her as an unwelcome reminder of white encroachment. She heard the word enemy often enough to recognize it in Apache. The test came 2 weeks after her arrival. Sarah was gathering wood near the creek when she heard horses approaching fast. Her heart hammered as she recognized the yellow shirt before she saw the face. Pete Morrison had returned, and he wasn't alone. 6 riders, all armed, were approaching the Hidden Valley's entrance. Sarah ran, her Apache clothing allowing her to move faster than her old dress ever had. She burst into the camp, calling out the warning Maria had taught her. The response was immediate. Women gathered children, men grabbed weapons, everyone moving with practiced efficiency. Samuel appeared at her side. "How many?" "6. Pete Morrison leads them." His expression darkened. "They tracked us here. This is grave danger." Broken Arrow was already organizing the defense, but Sarah could see the concern in the elder's eyes. The valley had one main entrance, defensible, but if the whites knew its location, more would come. The secret that had kept them safe was broken. "This is my fault," Sarah said. "They came looking for me." "No," Samuel's voice was firm. "They came because they cannot accept world where Apache makes choices, where white woman walks free. This is not your burden alone." Mateo Redhawk spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing towards Sarah. His meaning was clear even without translation. Give her to them. Save the tribe. Several voices rose in agreement, but more spoke against it. Broken Arrow silenced them all with a raised hand. "We do not trade lives for safety," he said in English, "perhaps for Sarah's benefit. We stand together or we fall together. This has always been our way." The riders appeared at the valley entrance, Pete Morrison in the lead. He had acquired a badge from somewhere, probably self-appointed, and he wore it prominently on his chest. "We know you have her," he called out. "Sarah McKenna was taken against her will. Return her, and we leave peaceful-like." Sarah stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "I'm here of my own choosing. Pete Morrison, go back to Cedar Ridge. You have no authority here." Morrison's face flushed red. "No white woman chooses to live with savages. You've been corrupted, probably forced to do ungodly things. We're here to rescue you." "I need no rescue from the likes of you," Sarah shot back. "The only force used on me was by my own people, selling me like cattle. These savages you speak of have shown me more humanity than I ever found in your so-called civilization." One of Morrison's companions, a man Sarah recognized as Duke Hartley, spat tobacco juice. "Maybe she's turned heathen herself. Maybe she's beyond saving." The Apache warriors had positioned themselves strategically. Arrows nocked, rifles ready. They outnumbered the whites. But violence here would bring terrible consequences. The army would come. The valley would be destroyed. The people scattered or killed. It was Maria Quiet Rain who broke the standoff. The elderly woman walked forward, past the warriors, past Sarah, until she stood barely 20 feet from the mounted men. She spoke in clear English, her voice carrying the authority of years. "You come to sacred place with guns and lies. You speak of rescue, but I see only theft. This woman chose her path. We choose to walk it with her. Leave now, or water the earth with your blood. The choice is yours, as hers was hers. Perhaps it was her dignity, or the steady aim of 24 Apache weapons, or simply the realization that they were outnumbered and far from help." Pete Morrison's bravado cracked. He wheeled his horse around, shouting over his shoulder, "This ain't over. The whole territory will know about this. A white woman living willingly with savages. You'll see what comes of it." They rode away in a cloud of dust and curses. The camp remained tense until scouts confirmed they were truly gone. Then, slowly, normal life resumed. But Sarah noticed something had changed. The looks she received were different now, still wary from some, but tinged with something new. Respect, perhaps. She had been given a chance to leave and had chosen to stay. That evening, Mateo Redhawk approached her for the first time. His English was accented but clear. "You could have gone. Why stay?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Where would I go? Back to being property, back to people who see worth only in submission. I may not belong here, but I belong there even less." He studied her for a long moment. "You brought danger to us." "Yes," she acknowledged. "And I'm sorry for it, but they would have come eventually, with or without me. Your valley's hidden days are numbered. The question is, what comes next?" Mateo's expression shifted, surprise replacing hostility. "You think like Apache. Perhaps there is hope for you yet." He walked away without another word, but the cold hatred was gone from his eyes. That night, the camp held council. Sarah wasn't permitted to attend, but she could hear the voices rising and falling in debate. Samuel found her afterward, sitting by Maria's fire. "Change comes," he said simply. "The council speaks of moving deeper into mountains, finding new secret places. Others say we must treat with the government, seek protection through paper promises." His expression showed what he thought of that option. What will happen? What always happens. We adapt or we die. But tonight, you became part of the story. No longer stranger. Not yet family. But something between. It is beginning. Sarah looked around the camp, at the faces lit by firelight, at the children sleeping safely in their mother's arms, at the stars unchanging above. She had found something here she hadn't expected. Not just refuge, but purpose. These people faced extinction with dignity and courage. Whatever came next, she would face it with them. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and wood smoke, of home and belonging, of endings and beginnings intertwined like the basket patterns she was learning to weave. The morning arrived with an ominous stillness. No birds sang. No wind stirred the cottonwood leaves. Sarah had learned enough in her weeks with the Apache to recognize when nature itself held its breath. She was helping Maria prepare morning meal when the scouts came riding hard into camp, their horses lathered with sweat. "Soldiers," one called out in Apache, but Sarah understood the word. Many, 2 hours, maybe less. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. This was not the half-hearted pursuit of Pete Morrison and his vigilantes. This was the United States Army, come to enforce their vision of order on the frontier. Women began packing essential belongings while men checked weapons and discussed strategy in urgent tones. Samuel found Sarah among the activity. His face was grim but calm. "They come for you, but they will not stop there. The government seeks excuse to move us to reservation. A white woman living with Apache, this gives them reason." "Then I should go to them," Sarah said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. "If my leaving would—" "No." Broken Arrow had approached, his weathered face set with determination. "We do not sacrifice one to save others. This trouble comes not from you, but from those who cannot accept Apache as human beings worthy of choice and dignity." Captain James Sullivan of the 5th Cavalry Regiment was a career soldier, his uniform crisp despite the desert dust, his bearing that of a man who believed absolutely in his mission. He rode at the head of 40 men, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the red earth and green valley. They stopped just outside effective rifle range, and Sullivan rode forward with a small escort under a white flag. "I am here for Sarah McKenna," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of the federal government. "She was reportedly taken against her will and is being held captive. Release her, and we can discuss terms peacefully." Sarah stepped forward, but this time she was not alone. Maria Quiet Rain stood on one side, Anna Long River on the other. Even more surprisingly, Mateo Redhawk positioned himself slightly ahead, as if to shield her. "Captain Sullivan," Sarah called back. Pleased, her voice remained steady. "I am no captive. I came here of my own free will and remain by choice. There is no crime here save your trespass on Apache land." Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he took in her Apache dress, her sun-darkened skin, the protective stance of those around her. "Miss McKenna, you've clearly been influenced by your captivity. No white woman in her right mind would choose this existence. Come with us now, and all will be forgiven." "Forgiven?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "For what crime should I seek forgiveness? For refusing to be sold? For choosing freedom over servitude? For finding more kindness among these people than I ever knew in your civilized towns?" "You're hysterical," Sullivan declared. "Sergeant, prepare to—" "Captain," a new voice interrupted. Samuel had moved forward, his rifle held casually but ready. "The woman has spoken. She is not prisoner. Your law says person cannot be taken against will. She does not will to go. What more is needed?" Sullivan's jaw tightened. "The word of a savage holds no weight in law. Miss McKenna is clearly not capable of making rational decisions. It's our Christian duty to save her from this heathen influence." "Your Christian duty?" Sarah's temper flared. "Where was Christian duty when my father sold me to pay gambling debts? Where was it when your good Christian townsmen bid on me like livestock? You speak of salvation, Captain, but I've seen your civilization's mercy, and I want no part of it." The captain was losing patience. "Enough of this farce. You will come with us, Miss McKenna, willingly or otherwise, and these Apache will disperse immediately or face the consequences." "No." The single word fell into the morning air with finality. Sarah stood straighter, feeling the strength of the community around her. "I will not come. And if you try to take me by force, you'll have to go through all of us," as if orchestrated. The Apache people began moving. Warriors took positions, but so did women and elders. Even children stood with their families, facing the soldiers with quiet defiance. It was not a military formation, but something more powerful. A community united. Sullivan's sergeant, a grizzled veteran named O'Brien, leaned toward his captain. "Sir, we're outnumbered, and they have the high ground. Any action here could be a bloodbath." But Sullivan's pride was engaged now. "They're bluffing. No one risks annihilation for one white woman." It was Broken Arrow who answered that. The elderly chief walked forward, past Sarah, until he stood between the two groups. When he spoke, his English was careful but powerful. "Captain of soldiers, hear me. You say we bluff. I say we stand for principle your people claim but do not practice. Freedom, choice, dignity. This woman came to us in chains of your making. We broke those chains. Now you come to replace them. This we cannot allow." "You cannot allow?" Sullivan's voice rose. "You have no authority here." "Oh man, this is United States territory. It was Apache land before your United States was dream in angry men's minds. But I do not speak of land. I speak of right and wrong. Is it not wrong in your laws to hold person against their will? Yet you would take this woman who says she does not wish to go." The logic was uncomfortable, and Sullivan knew it. He tried another approach. "She's been corrupted, influenced. She needs protection from herself. As you protected our women and children at Camp Grant?" Broken Arrow's voice hardened, referencing a massacre that even some soldiers found shameful. "Your protection we know too well." Tension stretched between the two groups like a bowstring pulled taut. Sarah could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one twitchy trigger finger, and blood would water the valley floor. It was then that an unexpected voice spoke up. Mateo Redhawk stepped forward, his English careful but clear. "Captain, I once hated this woman. Her white skin was symbol of all that destroys my people. But I watched, I saw. She works beside our women. She tends our sick. She stands with us now when she could save herself. If she is corrupted, it is corruption that makes her human. Perhaps you should ask what corruption in your world made her property." Sullivan's face darkened. "I won't be lectured by savages about—" A rifle shot cracked across the morning air. Not from the Apache positions, but from the soldiers' line. A young private, nervous and twitchy, had accidentally discharged his weapon. The bullet whined harmlessly off a rock. But the damage was done. Apache bows came up, soldiers raised rifles, and death hovered over the valley like a vulture. "Hold!" Sullivan shouted to his men. "Stand down," Broken Arrow commanded in Apache. For eternal seconds, nobody moved. Then Sarah did something that would be spoken of around Apache fires for generations. She walked forward, directly between the two armed groups, until she stood in the open ground where any shot from either side might hit her. "Stop this!" she called out, her voice carrying over the valley. "Captain Sullivan, look at what you're about to do. 40 men against a camp with women and children. Is this the glory you seek? The story you want to tell? How you massacred innocents to save a woman who didn't want saving?" She turned to the Apache. "And you, my friends, my family. Yes, family. For that is what you've become. Will you let pride bring destruction to this place? There are other ways to fight, other victories to be won." Slowly, weapons lowered on both sides. Sarah remained in the center, a bridge between worlds. "Captain," she continued, her voice steadier now. "You're a soldier, bound by orders. I understand that. So let me give you a way to complete your mission with honor. Report that you found me, that I refused rescue, that I am here by choice. Tell them I've gone native if you must, that I'm beyond redemption by civilized standards. Tell them anything, but leave these people in peace." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "You'd truly choose this life over your own kind? I choose humanity over hatred. Captain, freedom over cages, even gilded ones. And these are my kind people who judge by actions, not skin, who value courage over conformity, who know that strength isn't measured in the ability to conquer but in the will to protect." The captain was silent for so long Sarah wondered if she'd failed. Then he turned to his sergeant. "O'Brien, make note. Sarah McKenna located, refuses evacuation. appears of sound mind despite cultural contamination. No evidence of restraint or coercion observed. O'Brien's weathered face showed the hint of a smile. Noted, sir. Orders. Captain. Sullivan looked once more at the Apache camp, at the determined faces, at the woman who stood between two worlds and somehow belonged to both. We withdraw. Our mission was to verify Miss McKenna's safety and offer evacuation. Both have been accomplished. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Sullivan rode closer to Sarah, speaking quietly. You've chosen a hard path, Miss McKenna. When the government decides to clear this territory, and they will, your presence won't protect them. Then I'll stand with them when that day comes. Sarah replied, just as they stand with me now. Sullivan shook his head but said nothing more. The cavalry withdrew in good order, leaving dust and questions in their wake. As the dust settled, the camp remained quiet. Then Rosa, the little girl who had befriended Sarah, ran forward and threw her arms around Sarah's waist. That broke the spell. People surrounded her, not celebrating, for the threat remained, but acknowledging what had just occurred. Mateo Redhawk approached last. You risked your life for us. You risked yours for me first, Sarah reminded him. When you stood between me and the captain. Why? He was quiet for a moment. My wife was killed at Camp Grant. My hate for whites burned like fire that consumes everything, but fire that burns everything leaves only ash. You showed me that skin does not make enemy. Choices make enemy or friend. Today, you chose to be Apache. Not in blood, but in spirit. That evening, the camp held another council. This time, Sarah was invited to sit in the circle, though she understood little of the discussion. Samuel translated key points. They would stay in the valley for now, but prepare secondary camps. Scouts would watch for army movements, and Sarah would be taught to defend herself, to ride, to survive if the worst came. You have proven yourself, Broken Arrow told her afterward. But proving is not single act. It is daily choice. Every sunrise, you must choose again, stay or go, fight or yield, hope or despair. This is price of freedom. As night fell over the valley, Sarah sat by Maria's fire, helping to prepare evening meal. Her hands moved automatically through tasks that had once seemed impossible. Around her, the camp settled into its nighttime rhythm, children being told stories, men discussing the day's events, women finishing the endless work that kept life moving forward. She thought of Captain Sullivan's words about choosing a hard path. He was right, of course. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, the constant threat of a world that couldn't accept what she had become. But as she looked around at these people who had taken her in, who had risked everything to protect her right to choose, she knew she would make the same decision again. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, each a point of light in the vastness, like hope. Sarah thought, small, distant, but undeniable, and like the Apache themselves, still here, still burning, despite all attempts to extinguish their light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she was home. Winter came to the valley like a predator stalking its prey. Slowly at first, then with sudden, brutal efficiency. The first snows dusted the rim rocks in early November, but by December the world had transformed into something alien and hostile. Drifts piled against the wickiups, and the creek that had babbled so pleasantly through summer now ran sluggish with ice forming at its edges. Sarah had thought she understood hardship. The poverty of her father's cabin had seemed the depth of deprivation. But that was before she experienced winter in the Apache way. No stores to visit when supplies ran low. No credit at the general merchant. No neighbors to borrow from. There was only what the people had preserved through summer and autumn, and what could be hunted in the white silence of the mountains. The preparation had begun months earlier, guided by generations of wisdom. Sarah had worked alongside the women, drying meat in thin strips, grinding corn and seeds into meal that would keep, gathering piñon nuts until her fingers were stained brown. But despite all their effort, She could see the worry in Maria Quiet Rain's eyes as she counted and recounted their stores. "Bad winter coming?" the old woman had said in her limited English. "Birds fly early, bears den deep, mountain speaks of long cold." And the mountain had not lied. The temperature plunged until breath froze in the air and exposed skin burned with cold. The Wickiups, so perfectly suited to summer heat, struggled against winter's assault. Fires burned constantly, but warmth was a luxury measured in proximity to flame. Sarah learned to sleep fully clothed, wrapped in every blanket and fur available, often sharing warmth with Maria and the children who sheltered with her. Privacy became an almost forgotten concept. Survival trumped all else. It was during the third week of the worst cold that the sickness began. Little Rosa, the bright-eyed girl who had been Sarah's first friend in the camp, developed a cough. Within days, it spread to other children, then to the elderly. The sound of coughing became a constant percussion beneath the howling wind. Sarah recognized the symptoms with growing dread. Pneumonia. In Cedar Ridge, even with a doctor's care and proper medicines, it killed often enough. Here, with limited resources and the cold sapping everyone's strength, it could devastate the camp. "We need medicine," she told Samuel one evening as they gathered with others in the largest Wickiup, sharing warmth and worry. "Willow bark isn't enough. They need proper treatment." Samuel's face was gaunt with winter's hardship. "The nearest town is 4 days' ride in good weather. In this," he gestured at the snow falling steadily outside, "and they would not sell to Apache. They'd sell to me," Sarah said quietly. The discussion that followed was heated. Broken Arrow and the Elder Council debated while children coughed in the background. To send anyone out in such weather was dangerous. To send Sarah meant revealing their location again, risking more military attention, but to do nothing meant watching their children die. It was Mateo Redhawk who broke the deadlock. "I will go with her," he announced. "My brother's son burns with fever. If there is chance, we must take it." And so, on a morning when the thermometer would have read well below 0 had they possessed one, Sarah found herself mounted on a sturdy Apache pony, wrapped in so many layers she could barely move. Mateo rode beside her, his face set with determination. Samuel had wanted to go, but his skills were needed for hunting. The camp could not afford to lose its best provider. The journey was a nightmare of white. Snow fell steadily, erasing landmarks and direction. Without Mateo's knowledge, Sarah would have been lost within hours. They rode when they could, walked when the horses struggled, and sheltered when the wind became a living thing trying to tear them from the earth. On the second night, huddled in a small cave Mateo had known to find, Sarah's teeth chattering despite the small fire, she asked, "Why did you volunteer? You could have sent others." Mateo fed another stick to the flames. "You risked standing between gun and arrow for people not your blood. This makes debt." "There's no debt between friends," Sarah replied through numb lips. "No, but there is. How you say. Example, you show that enemy is not in skin but in action. I show same, maybe someday. No more enemy, only people." They reached the town of Millbrook on the 4th day, both nearly frozen, their horses stumbling with exhaustion. The townspeople stared as they rode down Main Street, an Apache warrior and a white woman dressed in native clothing, both covered in ice and snow. The general store owner, a German immigrant named Otto Steinberg, looked ready to refuse them entry until Sarah spoke. "Please, we have gold. Children are dying." Something in her voice, or perhaps the desperation in her eyes, moved him. Come in, but he stays by the door." He gestured at Mateo. Sarah wanted to argue but knew they had no time. She moved through the store with purpose, selecting medicines, laudanum for the worst cases, quinine for fever, camphor for congestion, alcohol for disinfection. She added what food supplies they could carry, sugar, salt, dried beans, anything that might help stretch the camp's reserves. Steinberg tallied the cost with growing amazement. "This is fortune you spend, miss." Sarah pulled out the gold coin Samuel had given her, part of what he'd used to buy her freedom. now being spent to buy life. Children are dying, she repeated. What is gold against that? As Steinberg wrapped their purchases, a familiar voice made Sarah's blood run cold. Well, Sarah McKenna, or should I say, Sarah the squaw woman. Pete Morrison stood in the doorway, backed by several men. His yellow shirt was hidden beneath a heavy coat, but his mean spirit was fully visible. Folks been wondering what became of you after you chose savages over your own kind. Let us pass, Sarah said quietly. We've done no wrong. No wrong? Morrison laughed unpleasantly. You're a traitor to your race, woman, and him? He pointed at Mateo. He's off the reservation. That's crime enough. Mateo's hand moved toward his knife, but Sarah caught his arm. Violence here would doom not just them, but any chance of future help for the camp. We're leaving, she said. We want no trouble. Too late for that, Morrison sneered. But before he could continue, Steinberg spoke up. In my store, there is no trouble. You take purchases and go. These men also go, or I get sheriff. He owes me favor. The threat of law enforcement, even frontier law, was enough to make Morrison's group reconsider. They stepped aside, but Morrison couldn't resist a final threat. This ain't over, squaw woman. The whole territory knows about you now. You and your red friends won't hide forever. The journey back was even worse. The storm had worsened, and they now carried precious cargo that couldn't be lost. They pushed through when every instinct screamed to stop and rest. Mateo's knowledge and Sarah's determination were all that kept them moving. On the second night, the blizzard became a white wall of death. They couldn't see, couldn't hear anything but wind, couldn't feel anything but cold. Sarah's world narrowed to the rope connecting her to Mateo's horse and the need to keep moving. When she fell, she didn't even realize it at first. The snow was so deep, so soft, and she was so tired. It would be easy to just rest a moment. Mateo's hands hauling her upright brought pain and clarity. No, he shouted over the wind. You die here. Children die there. Stand, walk, fight. She stood. She walked. She fought. And somehow, through will and providence, they stumbled into the valley as dawn broke on the fourth day. The camp was quieter than they'd left it. Too quiet. But Sarah had no time for fear. She went straight to work, showing the women how to use the medicines, dosing the sickest children first. Rosa's fever had climbed dangerously high, her small body burning like a coal. Sarah spent hours bathing the girl with cool water, spooning medicine between cracked lips, whispering prayers and promises. She moved from patient to patient, teaching doses and treatments, until exhaustion dropped her where she stood. She woke to find Samuel watching over her, his dark eyes soft with something she didn't dare name. Rosa's fever broke, he said simply. Others improve. You did well. Mateo did well, Sarah corrected. I couldn't have made it without him. He tells different story, says you have warrior's heart in woman's body. Samuel's rare smile appeared. High praise from one who once wished you gone. The winter was far from over. They lost 2 elderly members of the band and 1 infant too young to fight, but the medicines helped, and more importantly, the successful trip proved that cooperation was possible. Steinberg, moved by their desperate mission, sent word that he would trade with them if they came in small groups and caused no trouble. As the worst of the cold began to ease, Sarah sat with Broken Arrow and the council. Her Apache had improved enough to follow most discussions, though she still relied on translation for complex topics. You have earned place, Broken Arrow told her. Not as guest, not as captive, but as member of this band, if you wish it. Sarah looked around the circle at faces that had gone from suspicious to accepting, at people who had risked their diminishing resources to shelter her, at a community that had redefined her understanding of family. I wish it, she said firmly. There was a ceremony, simple but profound. Maria Quiet Rain presented her with a necklace, turquoise and silver, old and precious. Anna Long River gave her a blanket woven with the patterns of their band, Even Mateo Redhawk offered a gift, a small knife in a beaded sheath. "For the warrior woman," he said with a grin that transformed his usually stern face. But it was Samuel's gift that moved her most. He offered nothing tangible, just words spoken before the gathered people. "This woman came to us in chains. She stays in choice. She has walked through fire and ice for our children. She is Apache in all but blood, and blood matters less than heart. I claim her as family, as sister, as one who belongs to this land as much as any born to it." That night, as the camp celebrated surviving another crisis, Sarah stood outside looking at stars brilliant in the cold, clear air. She thought of the girl who had stood on an auction block months ago, proud but terrified, defiant but alone. That girl was gone, transformed by desert and snow, by hardship and acceptance, by a love that transcended the boundaries others would impose. Rosa found her there, thin from illness but alive, eyes bright with recovery. The girl slipped her small hand into Sarah's calloused one and said in carefully practiced English, "Thank you, Sister Sarah." Sister, not stranger, not white woman, not even friend. Sister. Sarah squeezed the small hand gently. "Ah," she replied in Apache. "Thank you for teaching me who I truly am, for showing me that home isn't a place but a people, for proving that family is chosen by the heart, not determined by blood." The winter wind still bit with teeth of ice, but Sarah no longer felt its chill. She was wrapped in something warmer than any blanket, the fierce love of a community that had claimed her as surely as she had claimed them. Spring came to the valley like a gentle mother waking her children. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, revealing earth eager for new life. Streams swollen with meltwater sang their way through the canyon, and the first brave wildflowers pushed through the damp soil. The Apache greeted the season with ceremony and gratitude. They had survived another winter, and the camp stirred with renewed energy. Sarah knelt by the creek, washing clothes in the cold. Clear water, her hands, once soft and pale, were now brown from sun and strong from work. She hummed an Apache lullaby that Maria had taught her, the melody mixing with the sound of rushing water. Peace filled her heart, a feeling so foreign after years of struggle that she almost didn't recognize it. "Sarah." She turned to find Samuel standing on the bank, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. In all their months together, she had rarely seen him anything but composed. "Walk with me," he asked. They followed a deer path up from the creek, climbing until the whole valley spread below them. New grass painted the earth in brilliant green, and the wickiups looked like natural formations from this height, perfectly integrated with the landscape. Samuel was quiet for so long that Sarah began to worry. Finally, he spoke. "The council meets tonight. They discuss moving the camp. Again, but we're safe here. For now. But Morrison's words in the town, others will come. The army knows this place. We must find new sanctuary." He paused, studying the horizon. "Some will go deeper into Mexico. Others speak of trying the reservation again, hoping for better treatment." "And you?" Sarah asked, though her heart already knew the answer she hoped for. Samuel turned to face her fully. "I go where you go." The words hung in the air between them like morning mist. Sarah felt her breath catch. All these months, she had been aware of him, his quiet strength, his gentle teaching, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. But she had thought, had assumed. "Samuel, He raised a hand. "Let me speak. I bought your freedom because I saw warrior's spirit in chains. I thought only to right a wrong, but these months..." He struggled for words in a way she'd never seen. "You are not the frightened woman from the auction. You are not even the brave woman who stood between soldiers and Apache. You have become..." "What have I become?" Sarah asked softly, stepping closer. "My heart," he said simply. "You have become my heart walking outside my body. When you rode into the storm for our children, when you chose us over your own people, when you sing our songs by the water..." "Sarah, I am not young man with smooth words. I am warrior with too many scars, too much loss, but what life remains, I would share with you." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Samuel Crowfeather, you beautiful, impossible man. Do you truly think I care about scars? Do you think I stayed only for the camp, the children, the cause?" She reached up to touch his face, feeling him tremble under her fingers. "I stayed for you. From that first night by the fire when you burned my chains, I was staying for you." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "The path ahead is uncertain. My people face ending or change so complete it might be same as ending. I cannot promise you safety or comfort or—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted. "I've had promises. My father promised to protect me, then sold me. The town promised Christian charity, then bid on me like cattle. I don't want promises. I want truth. I want someone who sees me as I am and doesn't ask me to be less. I want you." Samuel pulled her into his arms with a sound that might have been sob or prayer. They stood there on the hillside, holding each other as if they could stop the world from spinning, as if their embrace could build walls against all that threatened their small paradise. When they finally drew apart, Samuel's eyes held a light Sarah had never seen before. There is Apache way to join lives, not like white ceremony, but binding in eyes of the people and the spirits. Could you accept this?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, to any ceremony, any tradition, any way that makes clear what I already know, that you are my family, my future, my home." They returned to camp hand in hand, and the women knew immediately. Anna Long River smiled knowingly, while Maria Quiet Rain nodded approval. "About time," the old woman muttered in Apache. "Young people today, so slow to see what is clear as summer lightning." The ceremony took place 3 days later, at sunset, when the sky painted itself in shades of rose and gold. Sarah wore a dress made by the women of the camp soft doeskin, decorated with beadwork that told the story of her journey from the auction block to this moment. Samuel stood tall in his finest clothing, looking like the warrior he was, but with a softness in his eyes reserved only for her. Broken Arrow performed the ceremony, speaking words in Apache that Samuel translated in whispers. They spoke of 2 paths becoming one, of strength doubled rather than halved, of facing whatever came with joined hands and united purpose. They exchanged gifts. Sarah gave Samuel a shirt she had made, each stitch a promise. He gave her a bracelet of silver and turquoise that had belonged to his grandmother, a woman remembered for her courage. The camp celebrated with feast and dancing, precious resources spent gladly for joy. Even Mateo Redhawk, once her fiercest opponent, offered congratulations and a warrior's salute to Samuel. "You choose well, brother," he said. "She has proven her mettle is true." That night, in their own wickiup, a wedding gift from the community, Sarah lay in Samuel's arms listening to the night sounds of the desert. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," he replied. "Each day as it comes. The council decided. We stay through summer, gather strength, then move before winter. Some families go to Mexico, others to different hidden places. We decided?" Sarah considered. "Where do you think we should go?" "There is valley, I know. 2 weeks' ride north. Harder to reach, but more hidden. Good water, game, shelter from winter winds. Small group could survive there many years if left in peace." "Then that's where we go." Sarah said, "We'll help whoever wishes to come, build something new." "You say we so easily now?" Samuel observed, his voice warm with wonder. "Because we is who I am now." Sarah replied, "Not Sarah alone, not you alone, but us, together." The summer months passed in a blur of preparation and bittersweet farewells. The band split into 3 groups, each taking a different path toward hoped-for safety. 12 families chose to follow Samuel and Sarah to the Northern Valley, including Maria Quiet Rain, Anna Long River and her husband, and, surprisingly, Mateo Redhawk with his wife and young son. "Why north?" Sarah asked Mateo as they prepared for departure. "Your wife's family goes to Mexico." Mateo glanced at where Samuel organized supplies. "He saved my nephew in the winter sickness." "You saved him." My boy will grow up in a world where Apache must deal with whites. Better he learn from beginning that not all are enemy, that bridges can be built. He grinned. Besides, someone must make sure you don't get soft in your happiness. The parting was hard. Rosa and her family were among those heading to Mexico, and the girl clung to Sarah with tears streaming down her face. "I'll never forget you, Sister Sarah. Never. Nor I you, little warrior," Sarah whispered, pressing a small beaded bag into the girl's hands. Inside was her mother's Bible, the last link to her old life, now passed on with love. "Remember the stories I taught you. Remember that you are brave and beautiful and worthy of every good thing." Broken arrow. Too old for such a journey. Bless them before they left. "You carry our future," he told the departing group, not in clinging to all the old ways, but in finding new ways to honor the old truths. Be Apache, be human, be bridge between worlds. This is my prayer for you. As their small band rode out of the valley that had been sanctuary, Sarah turned for one last look. The morning light caught the red rocks, turning them to flame. An eagle circled high above, riding thermals toward destinations unknown. Behind her lay her past, the auction block, the fearful flight, the winter that nearly killed them, the community that saved her. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, the constant challenge of survival in a world that wanted them gone. But beside her rode Samuel, her husband, her partner, her truth. Around them rode their chosen family, Apache by birth and Apache by choice, bound together not by blood alone, but by shared struggle and mutual respect. They were no longer Apache and white woman, no longer us and them, but something new, a people defined by their commitment to each other rather than by the circumstances of their birth. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, seeing her backward glance. Sarah smiled, thinking of all the paths that had led to this moment. The defiant young woman on the auction block could never have imagined this future, riding free across the desert with a man who saw her truly, surrounded by family who had chosen her as surely as she had chosen them, heading toward a future uncertain but unafraid. "No regrets," she said firmly, "only gratitude." The sun climbed higher, warming the earth in their faces as they rode toward whatever awaited them. Sarah had learned the greatest truth the desert had to offer, that home was not a place, but a people, that freedom was not an absence of bonds, but the right to choose them, and that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil if tended with courage and faith. Behind them, the valley kept its secrets. Ahead, the horizon beckoned with promise and challenge in equal measure, and Sarah McKenna Crow Feather, once nobody's claim and now everyone's sister, rode toward her future with her head high and her heart full, ready for whatever came next. The Apache flag flew proudly in the wind, a symbol of resilience, while somewhere an auction block stood empty, a reminder that no one could truly own the human spirit. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, love, and the untamed frontier. Share your thoughts. What touched your heart in Sarah and Samuel's journey? Your comments kindle the fire that keeps these stories alive.